Good afternoon. Welcome to our Equal Opportunities Race Relations in Western New York Town Hall. I'm Al Waters.
And I'm Shannon Smith. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and others across the country at the hands of police have raised more awareness to the issues that plague our communities. Now, we've seen unrest unfold right here in Western New York and across the world in response to police brutality. Some protests were peaceful, while others turned violent. The demonstrations shined a light on unresolved racism and inequality. But in order to spark change, you have to have a conversation. So one local group, along with many others here in the city of Buffalo, has been working to build relationships between city youth and police long before George Floyd's death brought racial injustices back into the limelight.
Now, Fathers has been bringing both groups of people together for 20 years. Erica Brecker looks at how the organization's mission is even more critical now.
Leonard Lane is proud to be supporting city youth and bringing them together with local police officers for 2 decades.
And able to be able to break the ice, if you will, or the stigma that they may have about, police officers in the community.
His programs are working. Fathers has expanded its reach, now working with police in Amherst and Cheektowaga as well as Buffalo. However, some of the trust that he and Captain Steve Nichols have worked to build has waned.
Now we want to try to build that relationship up again so that the community can feel safe again, so the community can feel that they can be trusted again.
Captain Nichols has been working toward the same goals for even longer.
I actually started getting involved as a police officer while I was a lieutenant, and even before that on patrol. But while I was a lieutenant over here in the C District, I really started getting involved, and we started doing ice cream sundae giveaways and just socials and just trying to get to meet people and get to know people.
Nichols believes these efforts truly make a difference, and he says he tries to do his job by a Martin Luther King Jr. quote.
And he said, men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't communicate. They don't communicate because they're separated. And we've tried to get away from that separation.
Nichols says the Buffalo Police Department has more programs than ever before to work on community trust. They include Shop Talk, where officers hang out at barbershops, role play, where officers play the part of someone being pulled over, and even a partnership with Shays, in which an acting coach works with officers on toning down body language. He has this advice for officers working with people who right now do not trust police.
When somebody gets nasty with you, take a step back. Before you react, just one quick question to yourself. Do I know that person? You don't. They're not talking to you. They're talking to this. That's who they're talking to. And if you can understand that and get that in your head, it makes the job a lot easier.
As to where to go from here, Lane wants to see more officers out of their cars interacting on the streets.
Getting them to start, the little pep games, maybe the little basketball games, maybe the touch football, but getting them back out in the field, because we have a new generation of officers out here in the field today. And a lot of times, those officers don't know us and we don't know them.
Neither Nichols nor Lane want police officers or black men all painted with the same brush. And that's why they'll keep at it, building bridges to empathy and understanding.
We can't do it alone. We have to do it as a team.
Erica Brecker, News 4.
So for the next hour, we're focusing on race relations, what we're seeing play out right here in our area and in cities across the country, and how to work towards change.
That's why we've invited local leaders and activists to talk about these issues with us today. Now, we have an incredible, distinguished panel of guests joining us this afternoon. First, Maury Holman, founder of Stop the Violence Coalition, the president of the Buffalo chapter of the NAACP, Reverend Mark Blue, community activist and founder of Sports Unlimited of Buffalo, Dominique Calhoun, and Lieutenant Mark Swagger, who is retired from the Buffalo Police Department. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And we've seen situations like George Floyd surface around the globe for decades. First question to Mr. Holman. Why do you think the reaction to Floyd's death is so different this time?
Well, it's so different this time because it made news national, and that was made it really different from opposed to a young brother or a person being killed by police in our city or whatever. The national news had a tremendous role in what was pushed out there. And so cameras and place video makes it very accessible for us to see what's going on throughout the neighborhood.
Lieutenant Swaggart, we'd like to also pose that question to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, the severity of it. For me as an officer and as a person, it was completely unjustified. That was the outcry, that there were other officers telling him that maybe you should turn him over, and he wasn't listening. So it was so blatant. That was completely unjustified, and that's why it was such a harsh reaction, because most officers I know were upset at that.
The next question, I think I'm actually going to ask Reverend Mark Blue. So there were 2 viral video incidents of police and protesters that we saw here with Miles Carter being tackled from behind and Martin Gugino. Do you think that these incidents really reflect the community, the relationship between community and police here in Buffalo? And do you think that race played a way or a role in how those videos were perceived?
Well, one of the things, the heightened awareness of what was going on with George Floyd and Mr. Gugino. Mr. Gugino was also a member of the NAACP. I just want to let you know that as well. With those incidents, everything was heightened because of what was going on. And people were upset, they were scared, they were nervous. The police were uncertain about what was going to happen. You had individuals that, especially when the gentleman was tackled from behind, you had a multiplicity of individuals who weren't even from here, who were nervously reacted, I believe, to the incident. Well, Mr. Gugino, it was a blatant push. People may say, well, he shouldn't have did what he did, but you pushed him, and then you walked by him, and you seen that he was injured. So when you look at all of these things coming together, it just exploded. And everybody was more nervous and itchy and uncertain about what was going on. So it made for a more volatile situation to happen.
Dominique Calhoun, we'd like to get your thoughts on what we've been discussing. Can you hear us, Dominique?
Oh, she might be muted.
Dominique, you may be muted.
There we go.
Yes, yes.
There we go.
Okay. Just to piggyback off of the last 2 videos that were just showed, I just would like to say that I did see the video with Miles Carter, and I believe he was being interviewed by the news. And it's just unfortunate that they've seen a Black person in the streets and assumed that they were there for an ulterior motive, and instead of just there to peacefully protest, which every person does have their right to do. I believe from the video that I seen, not only was he attacked like from behind and shot, the newscasts were standing there as well. So, I mean, I think it's outrage in both videos, the way that both men were treated. I think it's very telling how the media took hold to Mr. Gugino being pushed as opposed to other things that are going on, because everyone's story should be just as important and just as equally important.
And speaking of the Martin Gugino incident, as a result of that, the emergency response team ended up being disbanded. Lieutenant Swaggart was a member of the emergency response team up until a couple of years ago when he was promoted. Lieutenant Swaggart, your thoughts? Do you think the disbanding the emergency response team was a good idea?
Well, it was actually the officers that quit. It wasn't disbanded. The officers quit because, as shocking as that video is, that was what they did was exactly what they were trained to do by FEMA. You form a line and you instruct people to move back, and as you move forward, you push people. That's literally what you're instructed to do. And FEMA actually trains us for, I think we were there for a month or maybe 2 weeks. I'm old, so it was a while ago. but you're there, and whoever the commanding officer also instructed people to move back and that they were clearing it with the megaphone. And then officers were ordered to move forward. As you move forward, you literally push people back. I've actually been in a line where there was nobody in front of me, and I had to do the motion of moving people back, because that's what we're trained to do. They work as a unit. And then when the officer did push him down, I don't know if everybody paid attention to the video, one officer went to pick him up. The supervisor grabbed him and told him to keep moving forward. That was a supervisor that was behind him. And then the supervisor called for medical support to come.
But Lieutenant Swaggart, I got to ask you, given all of that, do you think
Yes.
that it should be reconstituted, or maybe some different unit with a similar purpose should be put in place?
I think the outcome's going to be the same. In all honesty, they're going to tell people that you're either going to, because it's going to be tough, because you're either going to push people back and someone has a chance of getting hurt, or you're going to start arresting everyone. You're going to fill the jails up, and people are going to have issues with you arresting everyone who's protesting. It's a very hard situation to figure out what's right to do.
Thank you. That's a very valuable perspective.
Yeah,
Yes.
and going along with that, as far as change that we like to see now, communities across the country, including the city of Buffalo, have introduced police reform measures. Now, what reforms do you think will help to better people and police relations? I'm going to start with Reverend Mark Blue.
Well, one of the reforms that needs to continue to happen is more communication. We can't resolve any issue if we're not talking. So with the groups that have helped to inspire these new forms to take place, reforms to take place, I say kudos, because if we don't come to the table, then we're going to be on the menu. So we definitely need to be more informative, more talking, and also the police need to be a part of the community. They need to come and to let's meet, let's introduce ourselves. If you live in the community, and I'm gonna say this, if you live in the community, I believe you're less apprehensive to act and respond in some of the ways that they've been responding, because some respond out of fear. There have been a lot of African Americans who have been beat up by, I'm just going to say it, by some of the white officers, because they don't know them, and whenever you approach them, there's a spirit of fear instead of one that I'm going to protect and serve. Their duty is to protect and serve. Now, if we have a great communication and we're talking and we get to know one another, if you're walking the beat, sometime my cousin is Theodore Kirkland. He was one of those officers who was friendly, but he was mean, he was firm, but you knew where he stood. And a lot of people, they respected him because of who he was and how he was in the community. So we definitely need to continue to talk, and we need to have that community forum where officers and residents both get a chance to meet one another.
On that same vein, I'd like to direct the next question to Mr. Holman. Now, as far as reorganization, it's also been interpreted as defunding police. Mr. Holman, you work with the community and you work with the police department. What is your impression of defunding police? What does it mean, and do you think it's a good idea?
Well, what we did here in Buffalo was so unique that we actually went for forfeiture money that was sitting on the table, that when officers arrest certain people, that money was put in escrow or whatever, and we actually tapped into that money with the Buffalo Peacemakers. And so now we hired people from the community. We paid out stipends to people in the community. It was a form of defunding the police, but it was in the right direction. So they had a community involvement that built a relationship with all our organizations to sit down with the commissioner of police once a month to talk about issues of brutality with police officers or incidents that might have came out. When the COVID came out, and protesting came out with Mr. Floyd being murdered, it kind of ceased those actions that we were having that dialogue. And so now, when we are meeting now, we're trying to address these issues. But when you're saying defunding the police department and you taking these resources and giving them to big corporations out there to come and do crisis intervention in our community, it's kind of like hitting us in our face and saying that we're not valuable. The boots on the ground, the organizations on the ground that's been doing the work, that knows the people in the community. I'm part of the GIVE program, that's Guns Involved in Violence Eliminated. I ride along with police officers and probation and give people different avenues. But we've been defunding the police. People haven't seen it, but I'm just kind of skeptical about how they're using that word when they don't know the work that we do. I get beat up on podiums by organizations or protesters that don't know. They say we're working with the police. We're not. We work for this community. And if it so be that we getting funding out of their budget, then that means we doing the same thing that you're talking about right now.
We want to pose that same question to you, Dominique, because I know you do a lot of work in the community as well. And a lot of people talk about when they say defund police, they want those funds really reallocated to the community and being able to give resources in the community. So what do you think that kind of means?
Okay, so I think there is a lot of misconception about defunding the police. It's a lot of misconception surrounded by, no, it does not mean abolishing the police. No, it does not mean getting rid of them. No, it does not necessarily mean cutting someone's paycheck. It just means, like you just said, reallocation of funds. There are certain numbers in the budget where the numbers can be allocated to community resources to help the youth and the community as a whole. So such as the numbers of the overtime, court time, the excess funds at the end of the year that are used to buy military grade equipment, which we do not need. That was the equipment that was used that was in the middle of Bailey Avenue, a tank. They were shooting rubber bullets. There was no PSA to let the community know, hey, we're going to be shutting the streets down in order to use this military grade equipment. I feel like that night it was like a foreign country out there. We were at war. And, I just don't feel like we should be spending all of this money on tanks and rubber bullets when that money can, at the end of the year, be allocated to other resources. The money that they use for court time, a lot of those cases are thrown out because the charges are not sticking because they should not have been arrested in the first place. And a lot of people are abusing the court time because, you can go for 1.5 hours and get paid for 4. So, there are areas that can be fixed. For sure, and that money definitely can go towards flourishing the city of Buffalo, adding value to the city as well as the people.
Defund police, reorganization of the police department. This is a hot topic, and it's going to carry on. Straight ahead, addressing inequalities in education.
As schools across the state work out plans to reopen during this pandemic, it's brought up concerns about student access to technology while learning at home. Now, educators are racing to address the digital divide among students. So we'll talk about ways to close that gap coming up next in our town hall.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're taking an in-depth look at race relations and other issues in Western New York.
Now, the global pandemic has highlighted many disparities within the education system, including the difficulties in getting children the access to devices and internet that they need to learn. So, Dominique, we want to pose this question to you. How can we best address getting children the devices that they need to learn?
Well, I feel like this is one of the areas that, for example, the money that would be defunded would be part of education. So I know for myself, I have a pre-K and a kindergartner, and this year they did not receive devices, but they were required to submit homework when we all did go online through the Buffalo public school system. So I think it's very important that we know what demographic that we have in our city, and that everyone should have access to a device. It's very important, and should have access to internet. In other cities, they have free internet where you just log in everywhere and you can have a code. I believe they only have that someplace downtown, but it should be available throughout the entire city, especially for parents.
NAACP President Reverend Mark Blue, for the NAACP, education is one of your top priorities. What are your thoughts on students and race and making those educational opportunities equal?
Wow. Getting used to technology. Here we are.
We missed Reverend Blue, we missed the first part. Could you start from the beginning?
Well, yes. This new technology that we're into now, the adults as well as the children have to learn how to use it. This is going to be our new normal. The NAACP works to ensure that all disadvantaged students and students of color are on the path to a college or a successful career by ensuring access to great teaching resources and the challenges that we meet. It's important that we work together to make sure that our children, not just in the suburban communities, but in all communities, have access to the laptops and to all of the other resources. And the Buffalo Public School System needs to make sure that that happens in their budget. Through creative ways, they have to work together, both the unions and the administration, to work together to ensure that our children are first in their career, in their education, in access to the tools that are needed. Because I'm just hearing that they'll probably be going back to school, but they have to be going back to school with caution. This COVID-19 pandemic that we're in is real. It's not going anywhere. And even if they have a cure or a vaccine, they're still not sure that that vaccine will be able to help everybody. So they have to be cautious when we learn about opening up these schools again. But the virtual learning that they had to go through in this last quarter of the year is going to be something that's going to be continuing. So we definitely need to make sure that they have the tools needed in order to succeed.
I'm going to bring this question actually to Lieutenant Mark Swaggart. How do you think that we should really talk to children and students about race relations and inequalities in a school setting?
I actually was a school resource officer. So it's a big challenge because, number one, as adults, we have to stop passing on our biases to our children. And what the Reverend said, communication is the most important thing we need to have, especially with our youth, because we're losing them. And that's just not the children of color, but that's all of our children. Our separation is becoming so far away from them. As far as the funding goes, City of Buffalo, in all honesty, we don't have a big budget. You know, we're not one of those big cities with all these extra resources and taxes, because all of our tax base is out in the suburbs. So we don't have a huge tax base. So as far as funding goes to get like computers and all that kind of stuff, that's going to be a real tough thing for the City of Buffalo. We actually my son went through Buffalo Prep, which is a great program for inner city kids. It's a tough program, and it got my son into private school, and they paid 50% of it. If you're really smart, they'll pay 100% of it. But it's a really good program that University of Buffalo has for inner city kids, and we could start off with something like that, you know. But we need better grant writers. From my understanding, the city doesn't have a lot of grant writers.
Well, Murray, I want to ask you that same question. How do you think that we can talk to children and students about race relations and inequalities in a school setting? Because they see exactly what's going on and what's happened in the past couple of months. So how do you think we can have that conversation with them?
Well, it's really going to be hard, you know, with it's on my mind now, basically, Shannon, when you talk about how do we make this connection. Uh, I remember them passing out, Buffalo's Board of Education passing out laptops to kids. Some of them used them, some of them didn't. Some of them didn't know how to use them. Some of them sold them. I don't know how it goes, but I have grandchildren at home. And I watch my grandson go online and do the virtual class and have so many distractions in the house, not enough space to do what he needs to do, because of the noise of the other children, some of the things. The factors that they need to address is basically how is a kid going to use these computers? Is he going to, use them the right way? Is it going to be means for him to really understand what's going on? And especially with the teenagers that we deal with Stop the Violence Coalition and Buffalo Peacemakers deal with, I can tell you, I remember the kids wouldn't take books to school. So now you want them to use a laptop. Most of them won't. Most of them will be lost by the side and we revert to violence and things like that there because they don't have these means necessary to them. When he says that the grant writers are not writing the budgets right, whatever, but the Board of Education gets a lot of money. They have their own budget. Now, what they do with their money is really strange to me, but they're not using the funding to make sure that every kid in the city of Buffalo has a laptop and to do what we have to do. It shouldn't have took a pandemic for them to be ready on that level. And I really kind of mad about that because I went to some of these programs they had at East High School when I seen them giving kids, not just black kids, but they were giving specialized kids laptops. And I asked the principal, what's up with that? And they said, well, our kids didn't apply for it. But if they went to school, they should have got it anyway. Every kid in the city of Buffalo should have a laptop or a tablet to get them ready for the 21st century. Let's put it clear like that there. And so now we're facing it, and there's no answer to it. There's no answer to it.
Thank you, Murray. Now, we can continue, of course, this conversation about education for a while, but coming up next, we want to crunch some numbers.
Our News Forward's Erica Brecker breaks down some of the socioeconomic factors that play a role in dividing minorities and whites in New York. Welcome back to our Zoom town hall about racial relations here in Western New York. We're taking a look at what separates us as a community. Stark socioeconomic differences play a role in dividing black and white people in Western New York.
Our Erica Brecker spoke with a local think tank that keeps tabs on the numbers in order to arm advocacy groups with facts that help them fight for policy changes to improve life for black and Latino people.
The Buffalo-Niagara region is the 6th most segregated metropolitan area in the country.
It might be due to the declining population in this region. It might be due to very strong sort of neighborhood patterns of where people live, but we haven't done a good job. In fact, black-white segregation is actually getting worse here rather than better recently, which is a very sobering statistic.
Sam McGavern is a senior policy fellow at the Partnership for the Public Good. He and his colleagues research these kinds of statistics.
People of color in this region are unusually segregated, concentrated into the cities, Buffalo and Niagara Falls. The suburbs are unusually white. And if we look at income and wealth, similar patterns where poverty is more concentrated in the urban areas here than it is nationally. So it's a real double whammy for people of color here.
People of color have 2/3 the chance of living in a high poverty neighborhood, compared with white people who have about a 14% chance. And McGavern says your zip code can determine many things about your life.
People are breathing in more air pollution. They're more likely to suffer from asthma. The housing conditions are worse. There's a lot more lead paint, so the kids are more likely to have lead poisoning.
McGavran says poverty and segregation can breed into the next generation of people, and evidence of that holds true now.
The overall pattern still holds very true that east of Main Street is where about 80% of African Americans in the city live still to this day.
Historic racism is partly to blame. McGavran says some of today's segregation goes all the way back to something called redlining during the Great Depression. That's when the federal government mortgage program to help people buy homes drew maps to show banks the areas considered riskiest and where not to lend money.
Those maps were explicitly racist. So neighborhoods of color were considered high risk, even if they had similar incomes to white neighborhoods, just based on race. So those types of policies, their legacy still haunts us today.
Compounding the issue, McGavran says it's expensive to be poor, with insurance companies charging people more based on where they live. And when it comes to making a living, there are also major disparities in income, wealth, and wages. Blacks and Hispanics, for example, only make about 3/4 of every dollar that whites make. But as bleak as these statistics may seem, McGavran says meaningful progress is happening in Buffalo.
Celebrate the victories that have been won so far, but don't rest on them because we need so much more at every level of government to remedy these really terrible injustices.
So, good news and bad news. We got to ask Reverend Mark Blue, how important is economic opportunity to ending inequities between races?
It's very, very important. When we look at the social determinants of health, we find exactly what Sam McGavran was talking about. The access to jobs, access to better health care are all factors in making sure that we're able to survive. We look at even transportation. You can have a job, but how are you going to get to that job? A lot of the jobs are in the outskirts. A lot of the new jobs that are coming in are in more of the suburban areas. Look at Amazon. You have Amazon on Walden Avenue, and a lot of African American, Latinos, and women work out there, but they have to walk a certain distance when it comes to getting that job. So I remember I used to work at the Niagara Falls Air Force Base as a reservist, and I had to catch the 40 from Buffalo to Niagara Falls, and then catch the 55 there that took me to the airport in Niagara Falls. Now I had to walk the rest of the way to the Air Force Base in order to go and do my job. We need better transportation in the city of Buffalo. We need to look at some of those jobs and some of those companies and businesses that are going out to the outskirts and try to bring them more into the city, into the areas that we have here that are economically depressed. Jobs are important. Jobs will curb the crime that's in our city as well. A lot of our young men and women are out there, they're hustling, they're doing their own thing out there because they don't have jobs. They're trying to feed their children. They're trying to even live in a better home, but they don't have jobs. So we need to make sure that these social determinants of health are dealt with. We need jobs, we need better health care, and we need a better pay scale. Still, African-American men are being paid lower wages than the white men, and African-American women are getting paid even lower wages. So we need to make sure that we balance those out whatever way we can to make sure that there's jobs in our community. We need to put more money into the infrastructure of jobs, that job creation can create a better climate in which we're living in today.
Murray, I want to ask you, what are some of the roadblocks that minorities see in getting access to basic needs? A lot of times we talk about food deserts and how there aren't a lot of healthy options for people in low-income neighborhoods.
Some of the roadblocks we have here, Pastor Blue made it so clear. When I can talk to a young man, tell him about trying to go for training somewhere like the Northern Corridor, one roadblock is basically he has to take out a loan in order to get to training. That hurts a kid. Those type of roadblocks need to be pushed to the side, and we can better our community. But it's hard work. Pastor Blue made it clear about traveling distances and all that there to get jobs. I believe some companies that come into the city of Buffalo should be hiring in minorities. There should be more training sites, not just like the Northern Corridor, but smaller. Construction companies should invest in training kids. A flagman makes $20-something an hour. You know what I'm saying? We need to start pushing people like that, and then also we need to see growth on the east side of Buffalo. I was listening to the story, and it's no more red dots no more. It's just vacant fields. So there is land for development to happen. More community centers need to be opening it up, doing more training of kids, learning how to, do skills. I believe this country and this world was built with people that didn't have all this training, and we have done great things with that. But now you want a kid to go through all this training, and he can't even think straight, but he could, pick up a brick or a hammer and do the work if he was trained right to do that. So those roadblocks are sitting there by design, but we have to change that. And when you get a kid to say, "I just want a job," I'll take any job. They all can't work at Walmart's. They all can't just go, to the neighborhood corner and work, or a gas station, because they're either family owned. We have to make some things for them to really think that they are buying. ECMC hires a lot of minority kids off the street, and which is great. Get them opportunity to get in that field of house cleaning and all that there. But they advance themselves, and we have to think on that level a little bit.
Thanks a lot, Murray Holman. Straight ahead, healthcare disparities in the age of the coronavirus.
And we'll discuss how the pandemic has put the spotlight on racial inequality in the healthcare system.
Welcome back to our town hall. The coronavirus pandemic is worsening racial inequities in our society.
Recent data from the CDC shows minority communities are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So Dominique, I'm going to ask you, how have you seen the coronavirus pandemic highlight disparities in access to health care?
Well, actually, just this morning, I was reading a post about a woman who went to go get a test for her and her 3 kids. And they told her the tests were $287 total for all 3 of them or 4 of them to take the test. And so she opted not to take the test at all. So I know that we do have different centers that churches have been offering, different community centers and different places for free testing. But I think awareness is definitely needed for the entire community, or maybe locations, maybe mobile buses I've seen as well. But I think that certain people don't have health insurance. They may not have health insurance, so it may be hard for them to obtain a test. So that's something we just have to be mindful of.
Lieutenant Swaggart, your thoughts as far as access to good health care and the pandemic highlighting disparities in access to health care?
I'm just going to comment pretty much on what she said. It's the same thing. Especially here in Buffalo, I don't even know the number, but there's so many people here who don't have the economical needs to even get tested. In all honesty, I don't even know where you get tested, maybe other than ECMC. There's no broadcast for it. My son-in-law, I know he without work, he couldn't afford insurance, and I have 6 grandchildren. So there's no way he can afford to pay those fees. So my thing is they need to make it more affordable or give us stipends or something for people in the city to help us get rid of this pandemic.
Thank you. Now, speaking of health, food deserts. That's where you don't find any grocery stores, any way to get good, healthy food. They're prevalent in some areas of Buffalo. How does that impact their health and their lifestyle? And we'll put that question to Dominique.
Well, it's very important to be able to go to a local grocery store and eat healthy and eat right and live right. Um, we have a plethora of corner stores, McDonald's, liquor stores, things that seem to be detrimental to our health as opposed to making us healthier people to live longer. So I don't know if it's purposeful because I literally have to travel some ways when I'm on the east side to get to uh, a grocery store, and that should not be. There's plenty of elderly people who don't have vehicles who should be able to walk to a corner store or get on a bus and be able to get some vegetables and some healthy food.
Thank you, Dominique. I know that's definitely been something that a lot of people have been pushing for. Well, coming up next, moving forward, we'll discuss what it will take to improve race relations in our community. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for our town hall conversation on race relations here in Western New York.
We want to shift the focus now on what we can do to move forward towards bridging the gap and bringing communities together. We'll start with Murray Holman. In Western New York, we're seeing places like the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center and the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor. How is this sparking a conversation about race relations in our communities? Mr. Holman.
Well, it's great because actually, you know, they have been funded to open up those places to talk about our history. And now that we have the Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and people are protesting and they need to know where to go in the city of Buffalo so we can teach the history. Broderick Park, you know, bad place, great place, and then you had a shooting there. People are not knowing the history and not respecting the history that's being taught to them at an early age to be passed on. We have so many historical places here in the city of Buffalo that have paved the way for us to be talking now about Black Lives Matter. We definitely have to bridge those gaps and make it work through Niagara Falls as well. We're not traveling to those places. You know, I don't understand why. How come we have to wait for something major to happen to say, okay, we should go there? But we really need to start focusing on history here in our city. Miss Eva Doyle, Mother Eva Doyle, has done a great job of pushing out information about Black history, and she does that with her own funding. Billboard signs need to be up. More signs need to be up. More things like your show doing with you know, what you're doing today need to be out addressing some of these issues. And one of my main concerns right now with Miller Fillmore, you know, you're changing the name, but we ride down Fillmore Street. That street should be changed to Black Lives Matter Avenue. You know, things like that there, so we don't get lost in the mission that we try to push forward.
Fillmore Avenue to Black Lives Matter Way. I'm sure some people are listening to that suggestion. Dominique Calhoun, your thoughts on how we can increase this conversation and this awareness?
Well, first off, I just would like to say that Black Lives Matter movement has brought awareness, which was something that was definitely needed to bridge or try to improve the race relations because it has brought awareness to people about things that either they did not know was occurring or they did not realize hurt other people or the ways they handled situation may have been racially motivated. So this has just been an eye-opener situation for everyone. And I know that a lot of companies and organizations have taken like 21 days to reflect on how can they be a better ally for minorities. So that was, I've seen a good approach. A lot of groups have formed for Allies for Black Justice. But first and foremost, I think that we have to be very mindful and realistic about bridging the equity gap when it comes to housing, when it comes to employment and pay, and when it comes to education, the laws and the policies. Because without changing any of that, that will never help the racial tensions. It will just fuel it.
Thanks, Dominique. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.
This hour's just gone so quickly. We're going to have to get to Reverend Blue, you know, to carry on what we were talking about. Where do we go from here to improve racial relations here in Buffalo and Western New York? Your thoughts on that?
Well, here we go. I know we have a short bit of time, and I want to just leave these points. We have to deal with the social determinants of health. That's going to make a great difference in race relations. Don't talk to me about race relations if I'm hungry and no way to feed my family, and my family's hungry. The second one is education. We need the Amistad Law. The Amistad Law is a law that mandates that you teach Black history from K to 12th grade. People need to know the history. Listen, if we can build the White House and we had just one Black president to live in the White House, then it ought to be known. So we need to deal with the social injustices. We need to deal with racial equity. We need to deal with the wages, make sure that we have jobs. Jobs need to be plenty in Buffalo, New York. Deal with the education. Let's get the Amistad Law back on the books, so that our children can learn their history and that the adults can learn their history as well. We have too much white history and not African-American history in school. So social determinants of health, transportation, jobs, and education.
Thank you, Reverend.
Lieutenant Swaggart, real quick, because you've seen it all over the place. Just your thoughts very quickly on how we can improve racial relations here in Western New York.
The number one thing I think we need is communication. Communications throughout our entire city and the surrounding areas, and definitely working with our youth, teaching our youth, and definitely upgrading our education. Buffalo, we need to tighten up our education program. We need to not only educate the youth, but us as adults.
Lieutenant,
Mark,
sorry,
have to cut you
we're
off
out of
because
time.
we are out of time. We can only scratch the surface with this, but thank you so much for joining us. Mark.
I got cut off.